Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Korra Rewatch video. This one's going to be for K208 Beginnings Part 2. And yeah, I said it before, but I think this is my favorite episode of Avatar overall. Avatar and Korra together. This just manages to accomplish so much. Very similar to what I said about the first episode in terms of just world building. And lore details and stuff like that, getting some of the mechanics that are going to be important to the plot across later on, being significant to the Korra plot as well as telling an important story in and of itself. And also, it's got good character. Like the Rava and Wan relationship within this episode is actually very well done, to the point where you get the dynamic of friendship developments as they sort of learn from one another. And you reference stuff from the first episode as well, of you get that moment where Wan has to be this kind of person in the middle between basically his two best friends, Jaya on the human side and Ai on the spirit side. And it just happens that those three characters end up being the representatives of these kind of three separate factions of Wan and Rava obviously representing kind of wanting balance, and then the human spirit conflict being presented right here and Vatu taking advantage of that. It's really, really well done. I think everything in this episode, I've said before, I don't have any problems with regards to continuity or lore from Avatar. I think this does a great job at explaining what I think needs to be explained. I think the origin of the Avatar, the significance behind why the Avatar exists and kind of has a role in the world, why every Avatar born is aware that they have a kind of part to play, basically, why it's not just a random powerful person, and how they all know that there is a reason, there's a history behind it and an importance to it. And this does a great job at that, because it explains why the cycle starts, why the Avatar is always reborn, and I suppose how the other nations become connected when Wan seems like a Fire Nation citizen, basically. And especially some of the stuff towards the end is actually incredibly emotional, which we'll get to. But yeah, we start this off, and it's basically just a little bit extra from the end of the last episode, kind of Rava going off on her own, Wan being left with this kind of dynamic of you have no idea what you've just done. You've just freed the spirit of darkness and messed everything up, and he just is left to sort of travel the world on his own. And he comes across the Air Nomads, the early Air Nomads, and it's a really cool one because it's Wan's first time seeing a different kind of group of humans, and to see obviously a different culture for the first time. But they have a different bending element, which is I suppose his discovery of the fact that there's a significance to elements in the world. Okay, fire makes sense, but people can bend water, people can bend earth and air in this case. And to see just how amazing it looks that there's a flying line turtle there, and that's where they get their powers from. And it's really cool to see, because they are very similar to actual Air Nomads in that they seem to get on with the spirits. They seem to be the most in tune with the fact that there are spirits around, in that there are spirits living with them, at least smaller spirits. But they still live on the line turtle for protection. It still seems like they have the basic idea of, get airbending, leave the line turtle, come back with food. But it still seems like they're vegetarians and so on. The tattoos obviously are different. They're not standard arrows based on the sky bison. It seems like the markings are much more based off the line turtle itself, which makes sense. It's a cool kind of way to track the history of the Air Nomads in a way, just to see how different the tattoos were between then and now, and how clearly here they're not really associated with bending power as such. At least it doesn't seem, because they have to give their bending back. So it's obviously just something that when they get to a certain age they just do. Other little differences are that we clearly see families kind of living together, that there are women there as well. And obviously this is prior to the actual air temples forming, and maybe some of the more kind of some of the other more kind of rules and kind of regulations of being an air nomad come into play. But very, very cool to see them, and how after the initial shock of finding each other, they kind of bond over the fact that like it is still a unique thing in the world that Juan has actually just lived in the spirit wilds for years on his own. That even the air nomads who get on with spirits are very eager to learn what it was like for him to just live there full time, basically, for a large period of time. And that's when, obviously, Rava shows up. We see the spirits go dark. We see his influence over the world come into play immediately. And the idea that, more or less, the atmosphere of the world is shifted by the balance of power between Rava and Vatu, which is something that gets explained over the course of this episode, that the actual literal size of Rava and Vatu compared to each other kind of determines the kind of the percentage of light and dark in the world. And the idea that they go for here quite heavily is that once darkness gets a slight advantage, it becomes almost unstoppable to stop it from getting even more stronger. That once darkness takes over, it becomes easier and easier for it to take over more. And it always is that, I suppose, dynamic. It's harder to bring everyone back to full light than it is to create like complete chaos and darkness. But that's the effect that we begin to see, and how this ends up, I suppose, affecting the spirits becoming dark, and I suppose being more antagonistic towards the humans who are now kind of inspired by Juan out in the world. That causes more conflict and fighting and chaos, which Ratu explains basically fuels him because he is the spirit of that. So the thing that I suppose Vatu deals with as a spirit is heavily present in the world at this point in time, whereas the ideas of peace, balance, and light not really present all that much here because we're dealing with such heavy topics. And you see immediately that there's already been another shift in size. Like Rava's like half as big as she was before. Like Vatu's twice as big, and it comes down to, this is where they basically decide on what I suppose is like the first section of being the Avatar. That Juan feels that it has to be him, so he will be the one to obviously gain the power needed to defeat Vatu. He's a powerful firebender, basically the most powerful bender in the world, more or less, since I don't think we can immediately assume that like the other nations have really discovered how to use their bending to the degree that Juan, kind of learning from the dragons, has just yet. So he's already powerful on that side of things, but he feels that if he gets the other elements that are out there from the other lion turtles, that could be a way to kind of shift things back. And this is where we start to get into some of the mechanics of the Avatar, in that we know that fundamentally what the Avatar is in the present day is a human bonded with Rava who has the ability to bend all four elements. Juan at this point is just a human who has fire bending, and then Rava is this separate spirit. So we have to get to the point where Rava and Vatu become one and are like permanently merged together, and then Juan has to get the ability of three other elements. And they immediately say, the Lion Turtle says that humans can basically only hold the power of one element. It's never been done before, because they more or less say, it can't, like, he can't just do it. He even says that even though he feels it could be possible, the way he has to do it now is that Rava has to hold on to the power of air until Juan kind of combines with Rava and kind of gets it. And this is perhaps where some of the confusion comes in here, in that they're definitely not so clear as to the point where I think we can 100% say for sure exactly how like Juan's journey to becoming a bender of all four elements actually happens. My interpretation's always tended to be that Juan at this point in time can only hold the power of one element in his body. That is, it's literally a restriction on him, that in terms of when you are a bender, you have an extra amount of energy in your body that basically allows you to be a bender. So what happens with Rava is that when she passes through him, she takes the power of the element that he has, gives him the power of the one he wants, and in doing so, it sort of also sort of injects a certain amount of power into Juan's body for a certain amount of time, because it's effectively like a quick avatar state kind of boost type thing, is more or less, I think, the idea of what's happening here. And Juan, over time, becomes able to hold a little bit more power in his body, but they're never particularly clear on if, like, say, come the end of the episode, they're walking in, they're still separate, going into the harmonic convergence battle. If at that point, Juan is holding the 4 elements within himself, but can only use one at a time, or it's still a case of he's only holding on to one that he wants, and then Rob is holding on to the other 3. That it's always been my interpretation that that's the case, that he still can only hold one in his body, but his body and the fact that he's trained with all of the different elements, he has the ability to hold more energy than like a normal person in his body, hence why he kind of survives for so long with Rava being inside him. But the limitation on one element is still absolutely the case, and he has to have Rava pass through him to get it, because I watched it very carefully this time to note if they ever had him just switch to using a different element without Rava passing through him, and they don't. They kind of transition from one scene where like he's using air into the next scene, and he's still only using air when he's dealing with the initial parts of the conflict between Jaya's group and Aya's group, and then when they combine together, he uses all 4 for the first time as like the pre-avatar state basically. So there's that. When he goes into the battle of harmonic convergence, he has firebending, and he only uses firebending up until, again, he combines with Rava. So I think if we were meant to interpret it like a slightly different way, they would have shown him being able to, like the current avatar that we know, be able to use the 4 elements separately, but without needing to sort of like activate anything to really change between them. So it seemed like unless he had Rava pass through him, he wouldn't have been able to use the other elements on his own. So the actual harmonic convergence joining of Rava and Juan is actually the point where, yes, human and spirit become one, but it's also the point where the 4 elements sort of become part of Juan himself. And because, like, obviously he basically touches the most energetic thing in the world, harmonic convergence, when it's active, I get the idea that it like fundamentally alters his body to be able to contain more or less a limitless amount of energy within his body, in that he's gone from only being able to hold one element and contain Rava in him for like a couple of seconds, to now him and Rava can be like permanently merged as long as they want, and he can contain 4 elements within himself. So I think it all gets explained really well on a like technical front of like how the avatar becomes the avatar, but I think, and as much as I love that stuff, I love that they went into the detail of allowing you to figure out the details of how that happened, and then they'll use that to sort of, you know, create a dark avatar later on, in that certain aspects of the avatar can be repeated, but it can only ever be repeated every 10,000 years because of harmonic convergence. What I think is so impressive about this is that they managed to get it right on a technical level, but also on a like emotional level, that them, I suppose, being friends enough to be okay with merging together forever. And what I thought was so well done was you saw the transition of Rava over the course of this episode sees that Juan just wants to do good. He wants to find a way to bring peace between humans and spirits. And in the early scenes of this episode, you see a bit of the conflict that's at play, that Juan asks her what harmonic convergence is, and she of course explains it to him, which ends up being a very good explanation that is important to keep in mind for the finale, in that Rava literally says, neither Rava or Vatu can fully destroy each other. Even if one of them loses, they'll be reborn within the other, but it will take time, and during that time, you know, it'll either be an era of peace or an era of chaos. And if the chaos happens, basically all life will be wiped out. So that's the danger of losing, even though Rava will come back at some point. But there'll be nothing to come back for, in a way. And this is important for the finale because, of course, we know what happens. And it sets up the fact that even if a part of what the Avatar is sort of ripped apart, you can get that back in a way. Because the other, I suppose the takeaway, because we know of like the reset that happens with Korra, is that in addition to like everything that's happened, it means that over time, having been the Avatar for so long, it means that the human part of the Avatar fundamentally is always born from here on out as a bender of 4 elements. I really feel that that is the way we're meant to interpret it, because Korra can use all 4 elements when Raava's ripped out of her, like, come the finale. So that's an interesting distinction, and it is just, at this point, the spirit side of the Avatar that is Raava. And yeah, I suppose getting back into the emotional dynamic that happens here, when they talk about like why is there a conflict between humans and spirits, I like that Raava in a way can't see the problem with spirits and humans. She just sees the human problem. She doesn't see the spirit problem, even though she is the one to explain that, you know, here are the spirit portals. She brings up the idea of the spirit world to Wan for the first time, and that spirits have come from their world into the physical world over time, which has forced humans to seek sanctuary in the Line Turtles, and in doing so have lost touch with each other. And Wan brings up the point of like most humans aren't aware that there are even other cities, and she takes this to basically mean that yeah, because humans are selfish, and she more or less says that by like no matter how many humans are around, they still don't care for themselves. But it's her missing the point in a way that, no, the reason the humans are in a tough situation is because they've been forced into a tough situation. They're just trying to survive. And while, yes, they're maybe overly focused on themselves, but it's because spirits have fundamentally taken over. They have their own world, which humans can't really go into, but they also have taken over most of the physical world and are antagonistic against humans in their own world. And it's obviously the main frustration that I tend to have with the human spirit conflict is that it's so heavily, I think, weighted against humans in everything that I'm waiting for them to finally like have someone just say, spirits, you don't deserve respect, basically, to a degree. In that even Wan here is like, I will teach man to respect the spirits and we'll move on. But like it felt like the spirits more or less went like unpunished to a degree, or nothing was said or learned from like, do you not see the problem with what you did in basically like forcing humans to live on Line Turtles? That Line Turtles came into this world in a way to protect humans, that because of what you did, and they've never really addressed that to this point in time still, of like a large part of human history, humans were nearly wiped out in a way. They nearly completely lost touch with each other because of spirits. But the result is that, like, oh, humans have to learn to respect spirits. Now, I think that's a lot of the reason why I think Wan is justified come the conclusion of this episode in having the spirits go back to their own world and creating the separation at this point in time. In that, I think Korra, of course, is correct in trying to bring it back in this new era, but Wan was correct for his point in time, that he had to, separate them for humanity to come back together and resolve their issues first, before we can then move on to actually trying to resolve humanity's issues with a separate whole other kind of group. And yeah, just seeing that conflict and how Raava over the course of this episode learns to see Wan as the selfless person. From everything that he does, he puts himself on the line. That's another aspect of the whole spirits merging with humans thing. Every time he goes into the avatar state before he's properly the avatar, he's putting himself at risk, that he's on the verge of death most times when he does this, to try and create a peace between humans and spirits, to try and get across that, look how powerful I am because I'm human and spirit together. When you're friends with the spirits, it's better. That's a part of the theme of this in a way. And especially just before they go into their harmonic convergence battle, the scene of like Raava in the teapot kind of talking about how kind of noble and selfless Wan is. Like, I think that applies to more humans than she thinks. That it's not just a case of, you know, her. It's not just a case of Wan is the only one like that. And I think that's the interpretation that she gets. Going into that battle, she 100% trusts Wan, because Wan has to take up the brunt of that battle. Otherwise, Rava's just going in there to get destroyed immediately. So she has to put so much faith in him, who she's become friends with over the course of this journey, and to see how much he's putting on the line for this, and how at the start here she's kind of given up, but he's the one to give her hope that, you know, this is you know, don't be so negative, you know, this is only my first harmonic convergence, suggesting that he's almost planning to do multiple ones and get through them all. And then, like, come the end of the episode and Wan's death scene, which is incredibly emotional, and it's this kind of tonal shift in the episode at the time that it happens that you don't really expect, because they transition from basically like, okay, with humans only in the physical world, there were human conflicts, but I'm the bridge between the worlds, to keep balance in the world. And there's the idea that, oh, there's hope, he has some stuff to deal with, but, you know, he was the first Avatar, surely he made it all happen. And so to transition to basically he couldn't do it, it's really, it's a dark thing to do, to just have the first Avatar's kind of final moment sort of be failure in a way, and him having lost hope and in a way giving up on humanity. But Rava at the end of Wan's life is the one who's like, you know, we'll you know, never give up. Well, I'll be with you for all of your lifetimes and we'll never give up. It's a great scene because it's this moment from Rava at this point deciding basically that the cycle will continue. She will be reborn in the reincarnation of Wan, and the Avatar, what Wan has done, will continue. There'll be another attempt, there'll always be another attempt, because I suppose she sees the significance that there is to what Wan has tried to do here, even though he failed, but he accomplished other stuff earlier on in his life, and this idea of, you know, a human and a spirit together makes sense. Because I do get the impression that, like, I don't think it's necessarily an automatic thing that just because they're kind of bonded together, the cycle was always going to happen. I think it needed this moment of just like her, Rava, deciding that she wanted to do this to make it happen. So really cool to see that moment as like, okay, that's, you've now resolved every single thing. The one thing they hadn't explained up to this point is like, okay, but how did the reincarnation cycle work? But then, okay, very clearly here. And I suppose the other thing then is just like, how does it determine like that you're born into the next nation? I assume to a degree maybe it could be connected to bending, because of course he's going to have to be reborn into a group of people that have a bending discipline within their bloodline to a degree. And then the implication, because of, I suppose, let's get into a discussion topic for now on the war of humanity that happens, that basically is Wan's failure at the end of his life. Let's talk about this for a little bit. It's very quickly glossed over. We just get a couple of like, you know, screenshot, basically, just single images of this war that happens. And the visuals showcase the water tribe, like water bending, they showcase earth bending, they showcase Fire Nation. So it seems like the Air Nomads aren't involved in this for the most part. Maybe they end up being caught in the middle of it, but that fundamentally it's a war on three fronts from the three main kind of groups in the world. And I get the impression that the result of this war is fundamentally what decides where each of the nations is. That probably the Earth Kingdom end up winning this war, causing the Water Tribes to retreat to the north and the south, and the Fire Nation to retreat to the Fire Islands. And then I assume after the Line Turtles go away, the Air Nomads more or less decide to build temples in the mountains because they already were flying up high. That makes sense. I assume that's more or less how the world came to be the way it is at this point in time. Because obviously we see in the Earth Kingdom, when Zuko's traveling through it, a reference to basically the place where Wan dies, which is in the middle of one of these battles. So it seems like that's exactly how it has to take place. Now, of course, I'd love to see more detail on this to fully understand exactly what happened, what was the conflict over, and how did it come to an end? Who won? Who lost? Obviously, I think the speculation would lead you to believe what I said there, which is that this is where the nations really properly form. There's already groups based around, I suppose, their bending element and what line turtles they initially came from. But, you know, at what point in the world is this? Is this pre-leadership forming? How many towns are there at this point? I'm assuming that this is very, very early stuff before a lot of the, like, core stuff that we know of now, of Earth Kingdom, the Water Tribes, Fire Nation, really are formed. And I think the result of this battle is what determines where everyone is in the world, the placement of things. Because, and then I suppose it's after this point where you more or less have to think, okay, when does it then become a thing that, like, the Water Tribe people learn from the moon, the Earth Kingdom people learn from the Badger Moles, and like Oma and Shu happens? I get the impression it actually happens a bit later, because Oma and Shu, to me, comes across as if it happens after all these battles take place. The Earth Kingdom win the war, but then there's kind of individual conflicts within the Earth Kingdom, because we know that Oma and Shu were from like warring families or warring tribes, or villages, I think it was, and you know they are established to be the first two Earthbenders to learn from the Badger Moles. So it's one of those things where, like, it makes it a little bit messy then, like, okay, the Ancient Sun Warriors are the main people with, like, the main group of Firebenders to learn from dragons, even though Wan was the first. Then obviously, I assume the Airbenders discover Sky Bisons at some point, and their culture sort of transitions to being more based around them, now that the Line Turtles are gone. So, that's really cool, but yeah, I'd love to know more about that battle that takes place. I get why they kind of skip past it a little bit and just more focus on the theme of, like, Wan, you know, being successful earlier in his life as the Avatar, but struggling to deal with the main human conflict here, and there still being this need for someone to try and resolve this stuff, and that being where the Avatar properly comes into being as a thing that will exist forever, basically, because of the cycle. I suppose after that, let's get into, I suppose, the actual battle, the moment where we get the Avatar formed. I love this fight because it's very different. You get to see, like, Wan go all out with the bending. You see that him on his own, he's no match for Vaatu. When combined with Rava before the harmonic convergence stuff happens, he's sort of a match, but still isn't quite powerful enough. But most of that is because of the effect that Rava is having on his body, and you can see that, like, because Rava is, like, not overly, like, visual in terms of what her spirit form is like, she's not morphing him in any way, but the idea is that because she's pure energy in a way, that the threat here is that she's basically going to, like, destroy him from within by just kind of, like, overload of energy. And that's exactly the way they show him, in that he begins to sort of, like, go all staticky, as if, like, his body is going to, like, dissolve in energy or something like that. And you can see his dedication to this, that he's willing to accept his death if it means, you know, stopping Vaatu at this point. And the idea of, like, harmonic convergence, and then him being pinned up against the portal and just deciding to, like, in some way channel this energy. It's an interesting one in that, like, obviously they don't give much explanation for, like, why this happens, but I suppose just taking the wording of harmonic convergence, the two portals kind of merge together. It's the point at which, you know, there's the most spiritual energy in the world. It's the most energy, full stop, going through the mix of the human and physical world. It's about harmony converging together. It sort of makes sense just because of the name why it has this effect of kind of merging a human and a spirit together. That it's the only event in the whole world powerful enough to sort of transcend these sort of boundaries and actually like merge something like this. So in that sense it makes sense. Of course I'd love a more technical explanation, but I don't think it was needed as such. Yeah, that's I think most of what I really want to say about this episode. You get the kind of heroic moments after that of him deciding that he's going to help the world to enter an era of peace. He decides to close the portals. Vaatu gets locked in the Tree of Time, and like the main reason for the portals being closed is, one, yes, to keep everyone away from Vaatu, but secondly to, for now, create separation between humans and the spirits. I suppose I didn't talk about the Korra stuff at the end of the episode either. The big reveal, of course, is that harmonic convergence in the present day is just like days away, basically. So that's the big setup here of like, it starts to all come together now that we know the significance of the portals, how they relate to Vaatu. Mostly, we still need a little bit of extra information. Harmonic convergence is coming soon, which means the fight is destined to happen shortly. Korra needs to be ready for it, and she needs to keep everyone out of the spirit portal, so she's going to close the portal, because the idea is that, I suppose from her perspective, she's beginning to piece together that, okay, this is the reason Unalaq wanted the portals opened. I don't think she fully understands the exact details or how all this came to be, but that the reason she was tricked into all of this is because of, you know, some connection between Unalaq and Vaatu, and her wanting to stop that by closing the portal. Because I think it's Janora reading the book in the library, which is where we finally do get the like full reveal of like, if the portals are closed and Vaatu's in the tree, it'll just pass by. And that's why this actually hasn't happened in such a long time. So like some people, it's been like acknowledged that over the years, like it's been allowed to just pass by. Wait, actually no, this is the most recent harmonic convergence after the formation of the Avatar. So it's a bit weird how that information is even kind of like present, but I suppose the idea is that with the portals closed, they can't actually even merge together, and like harmonic convergence just passes by. Basically, the like energy aspect of the event, it doesn't even happen, and so it's just allowed to pass by. Korra gets a sky bison. We basically get the explanation for like how sky bison survived from this, I believe, in that they've raised a herd of sky bison who sort of like escaped the genocide, on their kind of island since the war, and that's probably how they came back. Because I think the story that's meant to happen at some point is that Aang eventually discovers this island or something like that, finds some of these sky bison, and that's how like the sky bison are still present and around in the world. It's either that or he discovers a separate herd somewhere else, but that hasn't happened yet. But it's a story I definitely want to get. But yeah, that's Beginnings, my favourite episode. I tried not to go overly long on this one, because I could have done like an hour-long thing if I really went for it. But I like so much of what's covered here. I'd love to have more time in the world at this point in time, to see how the nations properly form, how they begin to learn their bending, just what the state of the world is like 10,000 years ago, and how we really make the connection between then and now. But you know, it's maybe something we might get in the future, but I'm not overly sure. But yeah, that's been the review here, and we're into, I suppose, the second half of the kind of Korra focused side of the story here. And I think for the most part the quality of episodes is very high for the remainder of the season, especially going into the finale, but we'll get to those episodes when we get to them. But yeah, this has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.